The first thing Maren Voss noticed when she came back to Halvard Station was that the snow had changed. Not the color. It was still the same featureless white that pressed flat and merciless against every window. The same white sig she'd grown up seeing from her father's porch, on the edge of the settlement. The change was underneath. Something in the way it moved when the wind caught it. Too fluid, too alive, like it was breathing from below. She told herself it was 12 years of being away. You get sensitive to things when you've been gone long enough. You read meaning into surfaces. She told herself that while she filed her landing paperwork, Halvard was a terraformed colony on Kepler 442b, not the jewel of the Commonwealth expansion, not by any measure. Its settlers were drawn from Northern Hemisphere, Earth stock. People who'd been promised a planet that winter had already broken in for them. They got what they paid for. 200 days of white per standard year, a growing season that felt like an apology, and the particular stubbornness of communities that have nothing left to prove because they already proved it by surviving. Maren was a xenobiologist attached to the Commonwealth Survey Corps, and she'd been summoned back to Halvard because of a routing flag. A pattern of unexplained disappearances that the station's AI had quietly escalated through 3 tiers of bureaucracy before someone with authority decided it warranted a specialist. 3 hunters in the outer forest, a fuel depot crew of 2. One child, age 9, who'd been playing in the yard behind her house, 20 meters from a functioning security perimeter. The Commonwealth's official position was geological instability. There were fault lines under Halvard's western shelf, and the seismic surveys from the past 2 years showed activity. Sinkholes, cave-ins, plausible explanations. Maren had grown up in Halvard. She knew what plausible explanations looked like when administrators needed to not panic a colony. She pulled her field coat off the rack, checked the charge on her scanner, and went to find Sheriff Donald Chaplin. He hadn't aged exactly, he'd compressed. Whatever softness there had been around his jaw, and eyes had been pressed down into something denser, something that looked like it would take a long time to break. He was sitting behind his desk in the station office, with a mug of something that wasn't tea, and he looked at her the way people look at returning ghosts. Not frightened, just tired of being haunted. Voss. Chaplin. He pushed a chair toward her with his boot. She sat. Outside, the wind shifted, and the snow against the window moved in that odd liquid way again. You see anything on your way in from the pad, he asked. The snow moves wrong. He looked at her for a moment. Then he set the mug down and opened the drawer of his desk and slid a photograph across to her. It was printed on hard copy, which meant he'd taken it to the physical printer himself and not run it through the colony's shared network, which meant he didn't want the record. She picked it up. The photograph showed a section of snow approximately 4 meters wide and 8 meters long. At one end, a pair of work boots. At the other, a drag line that ended in nothing. Between the boots and the drag line, a red trench wide and deep, like something had come up from below and taken a man sideways. Tiber Nass, Chaplin said, 14 years with the fuel depot, knew every square meter of that ground. He took the photograph back and put it in the drawer. He didn't fall into a sinkhole, Maren. She had asked him once, when she was young and he was her father's deputy, why he always used people's first names when the news was bad. He'd said it was the only thing you could still give someone. The acknowledgement that a person with a name had existed and been specific and real. What does the Commonwealth say? She asked. The Commonwealth says what the Commonwealth always says when it doesn't want to evacuate 800 people. He picked the mug back up. They sent me you. The man wearing the eye patch was already in the colony's public house when Maren arrived that evening, and she recognized him even from across the room because there were only a few ways a man could sit in a chair like that. With his back to a wall that had 3 exits visible from his position, and all of them pointed to the same kind of history. His name was Jonah Hoffman, and 12 years ago he'd led the first xenobiology survey of Halvard's outer forest. He was the only one who came back. Dr. Hoffman. I go by Jonah now. He gestured to the seat across from him. His drink was half finished and he didn't touch it. I heard they called someone in. I didn't know you were still on colony. I wasn't. I came back when the disappearances started. He looked at her with the eye that worked. Pale blue, very steady, the look of a man who has spent a long time watching things from a careful distance. I needed to see if it was the same thing. Is it? Yes. He said it without inflection, the way you say a thing you've been saying to yourself in a room alone for years and have run out of emotion for. It's a subsurface predator, possibly a burrowing apex form that was disturbed by the seismic event 12 years ago. It uses the density differential between frozen substrate and loose surface snow to move at speed. I estimate 30 kilometers per hour through the upper 2 meters of the snowpack, though that was a rough estimate and I was running at the time. Marin put her scanner on the table between them. Have you seen it? Parts of it. He touched the eye patch. Once. They held the colony meeting the next morning in the assembly hall, which had been built to seat 300 and now held 460, the overflow crowding the doorways and the gallery above. Halvard's mayor, a heavy-set woman named Signe Overman, who had the deep voice and flat effect of someone managing a crisis that had been building for longer than she wanted to admit, gave a brief statement that managed to say almost nothing in more words than Marin had heard used for the purpose in a long while. Then a man stood up from the middle of the crowd. He was broad, maybe 40, with the kind of physical presence that rooms either organized themselves around or resisted entirely. His name was Mikhail, and Marin would learn later that he claimed to have killed the creature 7 years ago with an improvised thermal charge, a claim that 3 other people backed up and that the creature's continued existence made complicated. He stood with his arms crossed and said, loudly and without preamble, "We know what it is. We know where it is. Why aren't we killing it?" The room had the particular charged silence of a crowd that agrees with someone they know they shouldn't agree with. Mayor Overman said, "Because we don't have confirmation of Tiber Nas," Mikhail said. "Confirmation enough?" The silence changed quality. Marin watched Chaplin watch the room from his position near the wall, reading it the way a pilot reads weather. Not for what it was right now, but for what it was about to become. "Let me talk to him," Marin said quietly, to no one in particular. Chaplin glanced at her. She stood up. Mikhail. She didn't know him, but she said his name the way Chaplin had taught her to say names without meaning to, with weight, with specificity, with the acknowledgement that a person existed and was real. "Tell me what you know about the thermal charge." He looked at her. The room stayed quiet in a different way now. "It worked," he said. 7 years ago, I took 4 people out and we lured it to the edge of Sector 8 with a heat source. It's attracted to heat, we figured that much out, and I dropped a thermal charge in its path and it went down." He paused. "Or I thought it did." "What kind of thermal output did the charge produce?" 200 megajoules. Over about 3 seconds. Marin looked at Hoffman. Hoffman was already nodding very slightly, the nod of a man revising a model upward. "It wasn't dead," Marin said. "It went into thermal shock, torpor. It's been dormant since then, and the recent seismic activity woke it up." She paused. "But you found something real, Mikhail. Heat. That's what we're going to use." What Marin didn't say in the assembly hall, because it wasn't the right time and Halvard was a colony full of people who didn't need more to be afraid of, was what she'd found in the survey data from the 12-year-old expedition. Hoffman's original team had tagged seismic readings in the deep substrate that didn't match the fault line profiles. The readings were rhythmic, regular. They dismissed them as geological noise. They weren't geological noise. They were movement. They were the creature, and the creature was large. Far larger than anything Hoffman's glimpse had suggested. The dorsal ridge alone, based on the ground-penetrating sensor returns, was estimated at 4 meters. Total body length, somewhere between 15 and 22 meters. Not a predator, an apex form. A thing that had been sealed under the permafrost for tens of thousands of years. Frozen by Kepler 442b's ice age. Now freed by a seismic event that the terraforming process had, in some indirect way, probably contributed to. The Commonwealth had built a colony on top of a sleeping monster, and filed the readings under geological noise. Marin found Hoffman in his room in the station's guest quarters, and told him what she'd found. He listened without interrupting, which she appreciated. When she was done, he was quiet for a long time. "The heat," he said finally. "Yes, not just to attract it. If it regulates body temperature through the substrate, if it absorbs thermal energy from the environment the way the torpor pattern suggests, then an extreme heat event would overload the thermoregulatory system, yes." She spread her hands. "Like forcing a cold-blooded animal to absorb twice its body mass in thermal energy in a very short window." Hoffman picked up his drink, looked at it, set it back down. "How short a window?" That's what I need to figure out. How large an energy source? That's the other thing I need to figure out. He looked at her. What do you need from me? She reached into her field kit and set 3 data drives on the table. Everything you documented 12 years ago. Every sensor reading, every behavioral observation, every tissue sample, or secondary evidence you collected. She met his eye, his one working eye, which was doing the work of 2, watching her with the same careful steadiness she'd noticed in the bar. And I need you to show me where it went down 7 years ago. I wasn't there 7 years ago. No, but you know the terrain better than anyone alive on this colony. She paused. Probably better than the creature does. Something shifted in him. Not quite a smile, but the shape a face makes when it's deciding to commit to something it has been avoiding. Probably, he said. They went out the next morning. Marin, Hoffman, Chaplin, and Michael, who came despite being told not to, and whom Chaplin decided to bring along on the calculation that a man that determined was less dangerous in sight than out of it. Cameron Kane came too, a contracted off-world hunter who'd been on colony for an unrelated job and heard about the situation in the way that hunters hear about situations, which is to say immediately and without being invited. The snow moved wrong beneath all of them. Marin kept her scanner running on deep penetrating mode, which meant it drained fast and was heavy, and she had to carry it in both like an offering. Every few hundred meters she stopped and read the substrate. The creature was down there, not close, not yet, but the signature was unmistakable once you knew what you were looking for. A thermal void moving through the deep permafrost, with the slow, patient certainty of something that had no reason to hurry. They found Mechalel's old charge site by mid-morning, a section of the forest floor where the snow was subtly different in color, a faint gray-blue tinge to it that Hoffman identified as the residue of the thermal reaction binding with mineral deposits in the substrate. They stood around it in a loose ring and said nothing for a moment. It went down here, Michael said. He wasn't triumphant about it. He said it the way you say a thing you want to be true, even though you know it isn't quite. I watched it go down. You did, Marin told him. That part is real. She crouched and drove the scanner's probe into the snow. The screen filled with data. She read it, ran a calculation, read it again. All right, she said. Here's what I need. The plan was not complicated. The plans that work rarely are. You find the thing's weakness, you build around the weakness, you make it come to you instead of chasing it. The creature was ectothermic, secondarily so. It didn't generate its own body heat, but absorbed and stored thermal energy from the environment, which was why it thrived in deep cold where its prey could not follow. The cold was its resource, its camouflage, its medium of travel. It had survived tens of thousands of years under the permafrost, because the permafrost was warm enough, relative to the deep rock, to fuel its metabolism at minimal cost. But that same ectothermy was its limit. If you introduced a sustained high-energy heat source at the depth where it traveled, not a flash, not a 3-second thermal charge, but a sustained thermal column that it couldn't avoid without abandoning its feeding ground, the creature would be drawn to it. Its biology would demand it. And if the heat source was large enough, sustained long enough, with nowhere to go. We're going to use the station's geothermal taps, Marin said. She had Chaplin's office to herself and a colony map spread across his desk and a stylus in her hand. Halvard runs on 6 geothermal wells. The deepest one, well 4, goes down 400 meters. If we overcharge the exchange coupling at the wellhead, route the full thermal output up instead of through the heat exchange loop, we get a column of approximately 900 degrees Celsius, sustained for as long as the well holds. Chaplin looked at the map. That shuts down primary power for the station. For 6 hours, yes. We'll need backup generation for life support. If it doesn't work, then we've used up our best option and we figure something else out. She set the stylus down and looked at him directly. But it will work, Donald. The thermal mass is sufficient to induce total thermoregulatory failure in anything with this creature's body mass if we can hold it at the wellhead for 90 seconds or more. 90 seconds is a long time when something that size is in motion. That's why we need bait. She paused. That's why we need Michael. Chaplin was quiet. Outside, the wind had died and the snow was still, and in the stillness you could almost hear the deep substrate shifting beneath the world. He'll say yes, Chaplin said finally. I know. He'll say yes because he needs it to be his fault and his fix in equal measure, and there's nothing we can do about that. I know that too. She folded the map. Let's talk to him anyway. They set up at dusk. Well, Four's wellhead was a squat metal structure in the western forest, 400 meters from the nearest residential block, surrounded by a perimeter of marker stakes and old survey flags that snapped in the evening wind. The temperature was dropping toward -30, and the stars were coming out. Kepler 442b's sky had a particular quality at night, a density to its starfield that Earth-born settlers found either comforting or oppressive, depending on their temperament. Found it comforting. It was the same sky she'd grown up under. Hoffman stood next to her at the wellhead controls. He had shed the long coat and was wearing his field gear, which was worn in the places that field gear gets worn when it has actually been used. And he had the particular stillness of someone who has already made peace with a bad outcome, and is now simply to see which bad outcome arrives. You could be somewhere else for this, Marin said. So could you. It's my job. It was mine once. He watched Mikhail take up his position 50 meters out at the edge of the lamplit clearing they'd prepared. Mikhail was carrying a portable heat emitter, a construction tool repurposed, running at full output, throwing a column of warm air visible as shimmer in the cold night. The bait. I ran away from this world for 12 years, Hoffman said. I'm not running from it again. She didn't say anything to that. Some things you can't answer, and trying makes them smaller. At -28 degrees and falling, with the stars overhead and the white ground silent and unmoving, Marin's scanner chirped. Deep contact. Moving northeast. Accelerating. It's coming, she said. The snow broke 20 meters from Mikhail. It broke the way. Ice breaks over a moving body of water. A sudden fracture. A surge. A thing beneath the surface announcing itself without apology. The dorsal ridge came up first. 4 meters of dark, scaled cartilage catching the lamplight, shedding snow in sheets, and the sound it made coming through the permafrost was a grinding bass note that Marin felt in her sternum more than her ears. Mikhail held his ground. This was the thing about Mikhail that Marin had understood from the assembly hall. He was not a reckless man. He was a man who had made an error and carried it for 7 years schemes, and was constitutionally incapable of putting it down without finishing the equation. He stood with the heat emitter and watched the ridge come toward him, and he did not run because running wasn't in the calculation. The creature came up fully at 10 meters. It was. Large was the wrong word. Large was a word for things that fit inside human frames of reference. It occupied space in the way that geography occupies space. You didn't observe it so much as find yourself inside it. The head was broad and flat, shovel-shaped, built for pushing through compacted snow with the same structural logic as a plowshare. Its eyes, small and pale and set deep in armored sockets, caught the lamplight and gave nothing back. It had been frozen for 40,000 years and thawed twice, and it was not diminished. Mikhail took 2 steps back. The creature lunged. Marin hit the wellhead override. The thermal column came up through the ground with a sound like the planet itself exhaling. A deep, pressurized roar that the snow absorbed without echo, and the heat hit the air in a wave visible as distortion, as shimmer, as the air above the wellhead becoming a different kind of air entirely. 900 degrees Celsius at the source. The ground around the wellhead cracked along old frost lines. The creature felt it. That was the thing. Marin had trusted the biology, and the biology delivered. The creature had been moving at Mikhail, committed to the vector, and the thermal column hit its lateral sensing organs like a detonation. It reared. The motion was less like an animal reacting and more like a structure failing, a controlled collapse, a thing of immense inertia, redirecting itself along the only axis that made sense to its nervous system, toward the heat, toward the wellhead, toward the source that its body told it, in the language 40,000 years of evolution had written into every cell, was what it needed most. It came in at full speed. Hoffman pulled Marin clear of the wellhead by the arm, and they went down hard in the snow together. And she felt the pressure wave of the creature's passage as a physical thing, a wall of displaced air and thrown snow, and the deep harmonic of something moving fast through terrain it was built for. The creature hit the thermal column at full extension. What happened next was not an explosion. It was a conversion. The creature's thermoregulatory system, designed to absorb and store thermal energy, met 900 degrees Celsius sustained over a wellhead aperture of 2 meters and attempted to process it the way it processed everything. It took the energy in, it stored it, It kept taking and storing with the remorseless efficiency of a biology that had never encountered a limit before. 90 seconds. Marin counted them from the snow where she lay. Hoffman's arm across her shoulders, the scanner clutched to her chest, the numbers on its screen spiking and spiking and spiking. On second 67, the readings changed. On second 81, they stopped. The silence that followed was the specific silence of things that have been very loud and then are not. The wellhead's thermal output had depleted the exchange coupling exactly as calculated. The column was already weakening, the temperature dropping, the ground around them conducting away the last of the heat in slow diminishing waves. The creature was still. Mikhail walked to the edge of the perimeter and looked at it for a long time. Marin stood up, brushed snow from her coat, checked the scanner. The substrate signature was gone. The rhythmic movement that had haunted Halvard's deep ground for 12 years had simply stopped. The way a sound stops when the thing making it ceases to exist. How many were there? Chaplin asked from behind her. She looked at him. He had his hands in his pockets, and his face had the stillness of someone asking a question they're not sure they want answered. She looked at the scanner. One signature, she said. Just one. He nodded. He didn't look entirely convinced, but he nodded. Because sometimes the answer you can act on is the answer you need. Good, he said. Let's go home. 3 days later, Marin filed her report. It ran to 47 pages, including the biological analysis, the thermal mechanics, the colony impact assessment, and a recommendation that the Commonwealth commission a full substrate survey of all Kepler-class terraformed worlds with active seismic histories before any further residential development was approved. She wrote it carefully and completely, and submitted it through the official channels, and did not expect it to change anything in particular, because she understood how the Commonwealth worked. But she wrote it anyway, because someone needed to have written it. Hoffman left on the next transit shuttle. He stood at the pad with his bag and his old coat and his single working eye, and when Marin shook his hand, he held it for a moment. You going back to Survey Corps? He asked. Yes, there'll be more of them. Out in the survey zones. Things frozen under worlds we've only half mapped. Probably. He let go of her hand. Keep the scanner charged. She watched the shuttle climb until it was a point of light among the dense stars of Kepler 442b's sky, and then it was gone, and the stars were just stars again. She turned back toward the station. The snow was still. The ground beneath it was quiet. Somewhere below, in the deep rock, the geothermal wells were cycling back to normal operation, sending their steady warmth up through a world that was, for the moment, only the world. Marin Voss pulled her coat collar up and walked back through the white.